One of the biggest challenges in business is being able to turn one-off projects into repeatable, profitable project management systems. It sounds simple. Lean into process documentation, gather deep data, use advanced analytics. But there's more to it if you want to drive efficiency and scale your services. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table. In each episode, we sit down with leaders, innovators, authors, and entrepreneurs so that we can learn best practices that will empower our businesses. Today, we're joined by Claus Geissendoerfer, owner of Amstadd, an IT staffing and systemic business optimization specialist that helps organizations from multinationals to scaling startups shift from chaotic project management to highly scalable, repeatable project management systems, ensuring efficiency and sustainable growth. Claus is also an ambassador for Giving What You Can, an initiative that applies rigorous data-driven analysis to identify and support charitable causes that deliver the greatest good per dollar. In this episode of A Seat at the Table, Claus will discuss how companies can transition from chaotic project management to scalable, repeatable project management systems. The key operational metrics leaders must focus on to maximize profit per employee and eliminate waste, and how a partnership-driven model challenges and outperforms traditional corporate hierarchies in the enterprise world. So if you're ready, let's sit down with Claus and find out how we can reduce some of the chaos in our businesses. Claus, thank you so much for joining us here on A Seat at the Table. It's fantastic to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Jane. I really appreciate it.
Now, I think what you talk about is particularly interesting because you talk about the importance of trying to perhaps organize projects a bit better, organize our organizations a bit better. And what I think that's particularly interesting is because in a time when there's been a narrative that says move fast, break things, this Silicon Valley approach that almost lauds chaos. And while that sounds good on paper and it perhaps works in certain scenarios, it can be very disruptive to people. And on the one hand, of course, you don't want to get stuck in this way of doing things that you've always done because you've always done it that way. But at the same time, perhaps we need to find a way forward that includes change, but maybe not quite as chaotic. How do you see companies transitioning from chaotic project management to scalable, repeatable sort of project management systems?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think it's really about maturity of the organization, maturity of the people working there, and putting the right processes and tools in place. So it's a topic I'm super, super interested in because I think it's so important. And I think it has a couple of facts. I'll break it down into three. The first one is standard operating procedures, processes, people management, and then finding the balance. So the first one is really to document it, to document your process. I know that sounds super boring, but if a process is documented, you can follow it, you can update it, you can review it, you can change it. And the same is true for project management, for how we organize the way we do. So I call it standard operating procedures. I work with my clients to write those up, to review them, to get them signed off. And it's just such a nice way to have it clearly structured and clearly laid out for people. The second one, which I think is also really important, is the people management aspect. So yes, I think I agree with you that the old Silicon Valley approach, go fast, break something, doesn't work. But I work with a lot of big corporations, big enterprises. The rigorous top-down approach doesn't work anymore either, where you have like a CEO on top and then 20 levels of management. Everything is pushed down. At the end, you have some minions, some people executing the work. It's not going to work in 2025. I have a 18-year-old daughter. Through her, I met a lot of young people, and they just have different expectations when it comes to work. And it's really about finding that balance. Yes, you need strong leadership. Yes, you need some structures and some rules, 100%. But you also need to give and empower the people to contribute. So I think it's about having flatter hierarchies, but still maintaining that structure that, yeah, it's worked so well over the last 100 years. So, we shouldn't just break it straight away. So that's what I do with my clients as well. There's a lot of coaching involved, a lot of guiding people, nurturing people, just to focus on the right ways of doing it.
I think that's really interesting. Can you give us some examples of how that might be applied?
Absolutely. I worked with a client recently where we exactly applied this. So we started with the standard operating procedures, putting those into place, and then working with the leadership to redefine the way they interact with the people, the way they do change. And then I also often quote scientific studies. For example, there's one from Daniel Pink that looked into what do people really want in their life? What do they want to be motivated? And it was purpose, mastery, and autonomy. And I bring that to my clients to say, hey, what is the purpose that your organization is doing? What do you want to let people master? And you need to give people some degree of autonomy with, however, maintaining that structure, that rigor that we know and that works really well.
I think that's a really good point. I just want to ask you, how do you balance giving people the autonomy, but also the structure? And we oftentimes think of structure as a negative, right? Autonomy is what
Yeah.
people want, structure is what they resist. But the interesting thing that I've found, and you might have seen this also, is that actually people like a certain amount of structure. They don't want to be boxed in and being told what to do every single minute of the day. But actually, sometimes when you give people too much autonomy, they feel lost. They don't know where they're going or if they're getting it right or not. So people want that sense of if it's not boundaries, at least a sense of, am I getting it right kind of thing. And yet at the same time, as you're pointing out, people also want that sense of autonomy. How do you balance that out?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And it's really just working on a case by case basis, working with the team and a lot of it is majority in people. I think you often have an organizational structure, but it's really, do you have the people to support it? It's if you have a lot of people who are want to work autonomously, it's about figuring out, it's almost like doing an as is analysis for us. That's what I call it. Figure out what's the DNA of your organization. How is your DNA going to look like? It's about having candid conversations and interviews with your workforce, with your workforce. And then once you've done that, you can say, okay, I have a company, I have a structure that goes more into wants more autonomy, or I have a lot of young people, and I see there's a lot of uncertainty there. I think we need some more guidance. So it's really about having a structured approach to it, as is analysis, figuring out what the goal is, and then doing a gap analysis to figure out where are we, where do we want to get to, but also what's working for our organization. And it's really important. There's no one fits all. There's every organization is different, every problem is different. It also depends on the industry you're in. So if you're a startup and you're growing really quickly, you're changing your approach, you're changing your product market offering, you're changing all the time. You need a lot more flexibility and autonomy to the small team so they can figure it out. Versus if you have an established product, if you have been, I don't know, you've been running for 100 years and you know exactly what you're doing, you just need more rigor. So it's really just, there's no one fits all solution, Jane.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to say that there isn't sort of a one size fits all solution. And I think if I'm understanding you correctly, you have to, in a sense, document your processes and use those sort of as a guideline. And then at the same time, be able to keep testing and seeing what works. And then if this is working okay, that's pretty good. But if we're not really achieving what we want, then we need to revisit that and think about how we can, in a sense, redefine or create different guidelines.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly. It's about putting those structures in place and testing it with the people and then redefining those. Exactly.
Now, everything in business ultimately always comes down to profit, doesn't it? Especially
Yes.
these days, even though we like to talk about bringing value to the table and other things. But in the end, we all have to make a living in order to stay alive in business. And in some cases, there is a very big focus on how do we maximize profit, sometimes maybe in an extreme. What are the operational metrics that leaders must focus on in order to maximize profit per employee and eliminate waste based on your experience doing this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's similar. There is no one fit all. It really depends on what type of business you're in. If you're a SaaS startup, it's your monthly revenue. It really depends on the type of startup. But if I may, Jane, there's actually a similar point that I want to bring. So in the corporate world, in the profit-driven world, we have a lot of metrics, a lot of
Mm.
KPIs that we know how to use. And like I said, there are tons of different KPIs. But If I may talk about the other topic that I mentioned to you, it's the effective giving. When you look at donation work, and the reason why I bring it up, I think I've done quite well in my life, to be honest with you. I'm in a privileged position. I think a lot of your listeners are as well. And there's some research being done that if you earn more than 66,000 US dollars, you actually belong to the richest 1% in the world. I'm quite passionate. I went through a bit of a midlife crisis, but I came stronger out of it, and I'm quite passionate applying those rigor and those metrics that you just mentioned, not just to the corporate world, but also to philanthropic world and donating. And there's a group in Oxford that started in 2009, and what they did is they used the same metrics research that you have in the corporate world, in the scientific world, and applied it to donations. And it's just such a fascinating thing how you can transfer a concept from one area and transfer it to another area. And I think that's really important for our leaders today to have that transferable skills, because with AI, you can automate a lot of things, but transferable skills, context, that's something that only that you can do.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Now, how would you, again, as you talked about earlier, be able to maximize that profit for employee? Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, so if I may challenge you, it's not necessarily maxing it by employee, it's maximizing it for the company overall. Yeah, so some organizations maximize profit by employee, but again, there's no fits all, right? If you have a lot of technology, you can actually use automation and technology to maximize your profit rather than using it on an employee basis. There are just so many different models to maximize your profit, but I think it's really important to have metrics to measure it. So again, we talked about AI, about data. The first thing you need to do is you need to start collecting some data, cleaning up your data, and then figuring out what you want to measure. Is it profitability by employee, by product, by sale in the sales pipeline? Is it your cost of customer acquisition? Is it your lifetime value of a customer? And that, so you have your lifetime value of a customer, and then you compare it to your cost of customer acquisition. How much does it cost to acquire a customer versus what is the lifetime value? And I think that's one of the key metrics I would say to focus on that.
Yeah, that's really important. And you're right, the cost of customer acquisition nowadays, between actual money outlaid, but also time spent on nurturing people, on onboarding, on all the early stages of getting them integrated into whatever the product or service you sell, it's huge. Sometimes we don't even really document everything and account for it. So we're not really as clear on what that cost is, but that cost is big and getting bigger. So the importance of looking at lifetime value is absolutely critical. How do you measure that? Or are there any systems or ideas that you've come up with that enable a company to perhaps be able to track that?
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is CRM system. So it's usually a customer relationship management, a CRM system. So it's measuring how much does the customer spend. So that's one aspect. How often do they purchase it? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it one-off? Then you often have sales and support contracts. So what's the additional revenue we can get from our customer? And with a lot of industry nowadays, I think printers are the great example. Selling a printer is often a loss leader, but in companies make profit through the ink cartridges, which they have to sell every month, every time you need a new ink cartridge. So that recurring revenue, that's also part of the lifetime value. Then you also need to calculate churn. So people are leaving your organization. And then lastly, it's recommendations. And a lot of people forget that. But how strong is the word of mouth? How strong, how loyal is your customer base? Do they want to recommend other people? And then it's also about working with the clients and say, hey, we are a growing company, we want to grow. Do you like our service? Are you happy? And if you like it, do you feel like you can share it with some of your colleagues? And then that's another thing to measure. If a customer on average brings, or if 4 customers on average bring 1 new customer, that lifetime value of 1 customer is plus another 25% of another customer. So it's this massive calculation. And I think we haven't spoke about, but specializing is also important. You need to hire somebody who then understands data analytics, for example. It's the intersection between marketing and analytics. You have the big data on one side, but you need to have somebody who understands both sides of the table, who understands the marketing, the lifetime value of a customer, but also who's a brainy, who knows how to calculate, who likes math and analytics. And I think that's and a lot of actually the last thing I want to mention, because you mentioned systems, it's crazy, but a lot of companies I see still work with Excel. Actually, Microsoft Excel is still a good old tool to use just for basic calculations. It's been around for decades and decades, but it's still going strong from what I can see in the market.
I agree with you on that point about Excel. So many people look down on, oh, you're still using Excel. Some of the opening remarks from so many different people, particularly in the software sector, will always say, well, and those people, they're still using Excel. And I'm like, that be me, even though we have a lot of other software that we have in our company or things that we've tried and didn't continue. Sometimes the simple things are actually better. Because they're simple, you tend to use them. So I think to your point, there's nothing wrong with using Excel as long as you're doing something to track what it is you're doing. It's often better to keep it simple so you actually use it.
Yeah, and your employees, if you work for a larger companies, everybody knows how to use Excel, right? And there's always for new adoption of new systems, it always takes a while. You need to train people. And yeah, I think a lot of people know Excel already, so it makes sense to stick to that. For example, I know for a fact that large insurance companies, they're still using Excel to do massive calculations with like billions and billions of dollars and pounds and euros. It's all run on Excel because people know how to use it. They can use it for really simple formulas. We can also use it for tracking massive calculations and complex financial modeling as well.
Yeah, totally agree. 100. Much as I like to fiddle around with new software, and I sometimes can't resist getting my hands in the clay on that, I have to remind myself that, as you're saying, if people already know how to use it, that's a massive win. Now, you talk about the framework for evidence-based impact, applying a rigorous ROI mindset, right, to both corporate strategy and philanthropy. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Can you explain to us what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that's what I briefly mentioned earlier as well. So in the corporate world, you have this rigor, it's evidence impact, and applying that to philanthropic world. It's something I'm very passionate about. I've done well in my life, and I think a lot of your listeners have as well. And I'm just really passionate about sharing that concept that like it started in Oxford in the 2009 or so. And it's using that evidence-based, that strategy, the structures, and apply it to donations. And what they found out is like the most effective charities are 1,000 times more effective. So if you donate $1, you can have 1,000 times more impact. And you would have no organization in the world, no corporate organization that has such a difference, right? If you're in the stock market, you can invest in one company, you'll get $1,000 return, and in the other company, you get $1 return. It doesn't exist, right? So we have this amazing thing called the free market or capitalism that has negative sides, of course, but it also has good sides. It creates this marketplace. But for philanthropic work and for donations, you don't have that. You don't have the evidence. And what this group is doing, they're looking into applying rigor, scientific studies, randomized control studies, all the things that we're already using. For example, pharmaceutical companies have been using that for many years for drug testing, applying that same rigor to donations.
Could you explain a bit more this evidence-based impact framework? In other words, walk us through what exactly that is, how that's applied to any organization.
Yeah, so it's taking a step back and see what is the actual impact that we want to have. So in this case, it's not maximizing profit. It's having an impact on a certain person, like improving their well-being, improving their health. And maybe I can give you 2 examples, if I may. One is a net organization. So they want to see how can we help people prevent contracting malaria in sub-Saharan Africa. And they did lots of studies, lots of research, and they found out the cheapest way is to buy nets, to distribute nets to people, like a malaria net, a mosquito net, which is just dirt cheap. It costs like $4 to produce. It's nothing, but you distribute those nets, then it's again similar what we said with corporations earlier. This is your cost of customer acquisition, right? How much does it cost to distribute them? And then what's the lifetime value? So statistically, how many lives can you save, which equates to how much money can you make, how much can you do, how much impact can you have with the same amount. So it's really applying that rigor. And what they found out is that for $3,500, they can save one human life on average. And it's just so fascinating. And I've started donating some of my own money as well to say, yes, there's rigor, there's evidence, there's transparency, and they have applied those models. And 3,000, it's a holiday. That's a couple of times going out. And if you imagine you can save a human life with that, I think it's just so, it's really fascinating to have those numbers. I know I'm a bit of a geek here, but I'm really fascinated about it, Jane.
Well, it's very interesting to see those kind of metrics or that kind of a framework applied to something that we typically don't look at it through that lens. Typically, it's just looked at giving in a general way. And so I think it is important that you have said, actually, you need to put some kind of metrics on, not just throw money at a problem. You need to understand what you're giving, how it's working, where you might be getting the best return on those efforts. It's not just enough to have a generous heart. You have to actually be saying, are we achieving anything, right? Are we solving a problem, or are we just throwing money at it? So I think what you're saying is very important here. Now, how does a partnership-driven model challenge and outperform a traditional hierarchy in the enterprise world? Because you've pointed out the importance of not just having this very rigid structure, that you need to have structure, but you also need to have that autonomy. So could you dive into that a bit for us?
When you look at a lot of industries right now, they are multiple levels deep. So let's say you have a car company that sells cars, but the car company then has a supplier that has a supplier that has a supplier that has a supplier, and sometimes goes, 4 or 5 levels down where you outsource something to another person who then outsources parts of it to another person. And I think there the partnership model really comes into question most. You really want to have that partnership between all the different suppliers. They need to work together. You form cross-functional teams. You really integrate your supply chain super, super narrowly to make sure you work together as one organization. And it's this pull system where you say, I need more parts, I need more of this, and you can pull it through the entire supply chain. It's really about having that partnership with your suppliers. And when it comes more on the employee side, it's about being a role model for your team in HR and for the leaders to be a role model. And I think you have a lot of leaders listening to this podcast here to partner with your suppliers, with your employees, with your customers. So I think that the time is over where we had this strict separation of responsibilities. Now we live just in such an integrated world, and it's about forming partnerships. And sometimes, actually, really funnily, there are examples where big companies like Google, Microsoft, they actually partner with each other in certain areas, and certain areas they're competitors. It's just fascinating to see that partnership to be so multifaceted.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a very important point. And as you said, the world is in a sense changing in the way that we look at corporate structure. It's a lot more complicated than it used to be. And as you're pointing out, it crosses a lot more boundaries. There's a lot more fluidity in a sense. So to be able to maintain a certain amount of rigor that you need in order for it to be a smooth running operation, and to be able to adapt and go with the flow is not easy to achieve. You need to sit down and think it through using some of the frameworks that you've pointed out here. I'll put all of the links in the show notes so that people who are listening to this and would like to connect with you, Claus, on any of the different things that you're doing, all of those links will be there. And I would encourage people to reach out to Claus. I think that between what he's doing on the corporate structure side of things, as well as on the giving side, is really interesting and very relevant to what we're looking at right now. As we're recording this, we're heading into 2026. When you're listening to this, you may be discovering this. We're already in 2026, but it's still important for the time that we're in and to be able to at least give us a framework to think about what we're doing and how we're moving forward.
Exactly. Well said. Thank you, Jane.
Claus, thank you so much for joining us here today on A Seat at the Table. Really fascinating conversation. I've learned a lot from you, a lot of inspiration here. I think everybody
Awesome.
listening to it has also enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for doing that. You had some amazing guests. I've done my research, obviously. So yeah, you're doing really well, Jane. Keep it up. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.